welcome to Hopkinsville's African American History Cell Phone Tour, brought to you by the Hopkinsville-Christian County Convention and Visitors Bureau. I'm Matt Snorton, and I'll be your guide today.
Stop 1 is Founders Square at North and Main Streets, and the murals at Founders Square depict advertising for local businesses and social institutions, and among those featured is Ned Turner, a highly respected African-American tailor and inventor of the then famous BVS, or belt vest suspender, which together held up a man's trousers and provided abdominal and back support. Only a photograph of the garment is currently known to exist today. Attucks High School is also highlighted on the mural. From 1916 until 1967, it was the representative high school for African Americans. While there was a previous African American high school called Jackson Street School, now known as Booker T. Washington on 2nd Street, it appears to have only gone to the 8th grade. However, we aren't sure how long it lasted. On Stop 2, 6th and Virginia Streets, Postell block, a slave owned by Posey J. Glass, 16-year-old Peter Postell, was brought from North Carolina to Kentucky in April 1858. He later escaped and joined the Union Army during the Civil War. Postell returned to Kentucky after the war and in the 1880s built a 4-bay structure from which to operate his flagship grocery store on the first-floor corner. He also owned a furniture store and a large assembly room on the 2nd floor known as Postell Hall. The Union Benevolent Society, a prominent African-American fraternal order, met there. This is the same society which organized and operated the Black Union Soldiers Cemetery on Vine Street. It is said that upon meeting his wife while walking from the war home to Christian County, Postell spent most of his wages to purchase her freedom so they could be wed. Although that left him nearly penniless when he died in 1901, his estate was valued at between $100,000 and $500,000, a relative value today of approximately $2.79 to $13.9 million. Much of his wealth was earned as a lender to both blacks and whites, and on more than one occasion, debts owed to him were repaid with property. Postell also served as a landlord, and one of his more noted tenants was Claiborne W. Merriweather, who lived from 1869 to 1952, and whose law office was on the Postell block at 6th and Virginia Streets, presumably on the 2nd floor. Born to slave parents, Merriweather was a veritable Renaissance man who published his poetry in a writing style often likened to that of Paul Laurence Dunbar. And before his death, Merriweather had an impressive granite tombstone installed at Gainesville Cemetery in honor of his parents. Stop 3, the 4th and Virginia Street Hotel, set on the southwest corner of the block. Across the street from the hotel was Willie Nathan's restaurant. It was noted that during his acclaimed 1909 visit to Hopkinsville, Booker T. Washington came to town by private rail car. He chose to spend the night in the rail car rather than at the hotel, presumably because accommodations were better in the rail car. Stop 4 is the Virginia Street Baptist Church. Through a separate organized body since 1851, Virginia Street Baptist Church traces its origins to the New Providence Baptist Church of Hopkinsville, now the First Baptist Church, beginning June 6, 1818. The church was constituted at a log home on what is now West 7th Street, opposite the current Senior Citizens Center. 10 men and women, including a sister of color, were the charter members. The following day, 25 new members were accepted, 22 of which were slaves, and of those slaves, 2 became the first licensed by the church in 1821 to preach to African American members. For 20 years, beginning in 1854, Virginia Street members worshiped at an old brick building located on the northwest corner of 14th and Virginia Streets. Originally built for use as a cotton spinning factory prior to 1839, the structure was later used as a stemmery house for tobacco. Virginia Street Baptist Church purchased the lot on which its current church stands on the northwest corner of 3rd and Virginia Streets on May 31, 1892, for $1,150. Within 6 months, The Gothic Revival brick structure had been completed for approximately $15,000, and with few exceptions, most of the construction from the foundation to the tower was performed by members of the church. A great day of celebration and thanksgiving was observed on Sunday, July 16, 1893, when the new church was dedicated. Main Street Baptist Church, another African-American congregation, was organized out of Virginia Street Baptist Church in 1893. The group built a church on the southeast corner of 4th and Main Streets, and it was in use until the church adopted the name Mount Olive Baptist Church and constructed a new building on East 4th Street in 1980. A private apartment complex constructed in 2003 stands on the site of the Main Street Baptist Church today. Virginia Street Baptist Church remains an active congregation in the community and proudly celebrated its 160th anniversary in 2011. Now, stop 5 is the Brooks Memorial Hospital, and this structure began as the two-story frame house of Peter Postell Jr. and his wife, Fannie Mae Bronson Postell. In 1944, when Mrs. Postell died, physician and surgeon Dr. Philip Carruthers Brooks bought the property and opened Brooks Hospital without state or federal assistance. Matt Moore, a highly accomplished African-American stonemason, was chiefly responsible for the renovation work that included rock veneering the exterior of the home. Educated at Howard University Medical School in Washington, D.C., Dr. Brooks graduated first in his class in 1927. He operated Brooks Memorial Hospital with a 30-bed capacity from 1944 until 1977, when he was admitted as the first African-American physician on staff at Jenny Stewart Medical Center. Before that, he served as the first African-American staff physician at Western State Hospital from 1940 through 1944. Dr. Brooks also became the first African-American elected to the Integrated School Board in 1962. Born the eldest of 13 children, Dr. Brooks passed away November 28, 1982, and is interred at Green Hill Memorial Gardens. Among his honorary pallbearers were Dr. James W. Frazier, who operated a medical clinic on Clay Street. Stop number 6 is the Freeman Chapel CME Church. And prior to the Civil War, there were no segregated black churches, and in those times, slaves, white slave owners, and free men of color worshiped together in the same buildings. Many churches would distinguish its membership by noting in official documents whether its attendees were slaves or indentured servants, etc. Because a majority of local whites were Baptists, some blacks chose to establish other denominations to distinguish themselves from their former slave owners, and one such example is that of Freeman Chapel. Named for the steward Peter Freeman in 1866, African-American members of the Christian, Methodist, and Episcopal churches of Hopkinsville organized Freeman's Chapel CME, or the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, where Bill Belial's store is on 9th Street. They then constructed a building on the southeast corner of 11th and Liberty Streets, the current location of PAX, and worshiped there until the present structure was completed on the northwest corner of Virginia and 2nd Streets in 1925. Few changes can be observed in the church from the time it was built. And in 1892, a group of members from Freeman's Chapel CME Church organized Lane Tabernacle CME Church in honor of Bishop Isaac Lane. They erected a brick church on the southwest corner of East 1st and Vine Streets in 1898, and this building was replaced by the present church in March 1958. And for stop number 7, the College of the Bible, Hopkinsville Male and Female College, it was founded in 1883 by the First District and Little River Baptist Associations as a religious and educational training institution. The first board of directors was appointed in 1890, and the campus was purchased in 1893 for $1,600. The two-story frame building measured 40 by 90, and there was also a 2,000-square-foot auditorium, 4 classrooms, an office, first-floor kitchen, and a 17-person dormitory on the second floor. In 1900, a typical instructional day began with a 5 a.m. rising bell, followed by chapel, 3 hours of morning classes, afternoon industrial and recitation work, evening study, and 10 p.m. lights out. The school's first principal was Reverend A.C. Schaffner, A.M., who served one term. He was followed by Professor P.T. Fraser, who served as president from 1900 until 1920. A tornado destroyed the building on May 2, 1935, and during its reconstruction period, classes did not stop. Instead, they were held in area churches. Contractor and stonemason Sam L. Stewart constructed the present building in 1938. In 1965, the school was renamed Hopkinsville College of the Bible. Just around the corner from the school rests the 4-acre Vine Street Cemetery, the final resting place of 6 African-American Union soldiers and Reverend H. McNeil, better known as Aaron McNeil, and it is one of 5 such African-American Civil War cemeteries in the state. On stop 8 is the Attucks High School, and because of overcrowding at Jackson Street School, a bond issue was approved for construction of a high school for blacks. In 1915, materials such as the window lintels from the old Clay Street School were reused to build Attucks High School. And while some accepted the cost-cutting measure, others in the African-American community were concerned about the reclamation project, rejecting the notion of getting substandard building materials. Ultimately, the project was undertaken by the Forbes Manufacturing at a cost of $17,640. Opening Monday, October 30th, 1916, the school was a 2-story brick building with 6 classrooms, recitation rooms, a gymnasium, an assembly room study hall large enough to seat 200 to 300 people, and teacher's lounge, principal's office, as well as manual training and domestic science rooms. In keeping with the custom of the times, there were separate boys' and girls' entrances. Notably, the school has never formally been known as Crispus Attucks High School. The school's first principal, R.L. Posey, was a Berea College graduate, and the wife of Peter Postell, Jr., Mrs. Fannie Mae Bronson Postell, was an organizer of the school, as well as the second-to-last and only female school principal serving from 1926 to 1934. The school was under the supervision of Black City School District, Black Board of Education, which was separate and distinct from the white district. The 2 boards of education were not merged until forced to do so by the State Department of Education in 1934. The school was closed in 1967. Number 9 relates to the Postons. Ephraim Poston was born in 1865 in Clarksville, Tennessee, and in the 1880s, Ephraim and Molly Cox met at Roger Williams University, a black teachers' college in Nashville. They were married in 1887 at their parents' home. Molly taught in city and county schools from 1886 until 1912 and later became the first supervisor of a Negro industrial school in Kentucky. F, as he was known to family and friends, was a published poetry author who produced a political satire series in the Kentucky New Era from 1908 to 1912. He served as a professor and a dean for 2 years at Kentucky Normal and Industrial Institute, which became Kentucky State University. Born in 1906, Ted Poston was the youngest of the couple's 7 children, all of whom received a formal education. His full name was Theodore Roosevelt Augustus Major Poston. He graduated from Attucks High School in 1924, and as a black journalist writing 35 years for a white mainstream newspaper, the New York Post, he covered some of the country's biggest civil rights stories of the 1950s and 60s. The Postons were members of Virginia Street Baptist Church and lived on Hayes Street in a gray 2-story house that included a library. The house is no longer standing, and in 1917, around the time the Poston family lost its home on Hayes Street, Molly became ill with a kidney disease. She died the same year when Ted was 10 years old. His biographer noted that Ted's joyful childhood stories, as compiled in The Dark Side of Hopkinsville, all related his life before his mother's death. 2 of Ted's older brothers, Robert Lincoln, 1895 to 1924, and Ulysses Simpson Poston, 1892 to 1955, were also politically active journalists. After both served brief time in the military, they owned and edited a newspaper called The Contender. It became notorious when Robert wrote about the injustice of black soldiers being forced to march at the rear of a Hopkinsville military welcome parade at the end of World War I. The Postons were no longer able to print the paper locally and ultimately moved to Detroit in 1920 to continue its publication. The Poston brothers were later associated with Marcus Garvey, the activist who led the black nationalist movement, and while with him in New York, Ulysses, a 1915 graduate of what is now Kentucky State University, created the Negro World, a successful African-American daily paper. He later started the New York Contender and ran a realty office in the 1940s. He died in 1955, and Ted handled the arrangements. Ulysses was buried at Long Island National Cemetery. Robert, who married Harlem Renaissance sculptor Augusta Savage, was Assistant Secretary General of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. He was head of a delegation that went to Liberia in 1924 to talk with the government. Robert died of pneumonia on the return trip to the U.S. Ted also later passed away in 1974, and he and Robert are both laid to rest in the Cave Springs Cemetery. Now, stop number 10 is the Booker T. Washington Elementary School. After the Black Board of Education began, its first school was constructed in 1882. It was a wood frame building named Jackson Street School in honor of Reverend Peter Jackson, who also lived on the street. The school's moniker was changed in 1886 when named streets like Jackson were renamed to numbered streets. Hence, Jackson Street School became Second Street School. The Black Board of Education renamed the school again in 1922 in honor of an earlier visit and 2-hour speech by Booker T. Washington at Union Tabernacle's 2,500-seat auditorium. Professor P.T. Fraser was also featured on the event program. The newspaper reported that on Monday, November 22, 1909, the auditorium, reserved primarily for African Americans, was packed with only one section of seats roped off for whites. Washington and his party left for Clarksville, Tennessee the next day. The building is now owned by Cedar Grove Baptist Church, which is restoring the facility into a community campus aimed at providing assistance to the entire family, not just children. Among future plans for the space are a museum, daycare, fitness facilities in partnership with the local YMCA, wellness programs, and athletic events in the gym, complete with a stage and classic Pepsi-Cola scoreboard. Now we're at stop 11, which is the Aaron McNeil House. Good Shepherd Church was established at the corner of 2nd and South Campbell Streets. The building was constructed in 1896 from funds raised by Nat Gaither, president of the Bank of Hopkinsville, and Walker Wood Sr., publisher of Kentucky New Era, both of whom were vestrymen of Grace Episcopal Church. Gaither had earlier founded a Sunday school in the black community as well as a regular day school, whose leadership Aaron McNeil assumed when he came to Hopkinsville. This made McNeil the first black Episcopal minister in Christian County for a number of years, and the building housed the only public library open to the black community in the city or the county. The building was purchased from the Diocese of Kentucky and renovated into the Aaron McNeil House for use as a community center in 1970. For our stop number 12, the Black Police Precinct, beginning in 1907, PS&J served as the home base of the Good Samaritan Colored Society, a prominent African-American fraternal order and East Coast abolitionist group. It also served as the Christian County Colored Substation and jail where 4 officers served, and James L. Allensworth was manager. He was also coroner from 1894 to 1910. Not authorized to police within the white community, the officers focused their energies on neighborhood nightlife among the area's 24 clubs or so. So popular were the club venues that it wasn't unheard of for club goers to pass those heading to church Sunday morning and those getting out of jail. Stop 13 deals with the Whitneys. Christian County was one of only 5 counties in the state that permitted blacks to practice law. It was for this reason that James T. Whitney Sr., the son of a free slave, moved from Glasgow to Hopkinsville in 1898. He began his career in 1899 as one of the first black postal workers in the city. He carried mail nearly a quarter of a century, and although he did not attend law school, he was an avid reader and passed the bar exam to become an attorney. He was still practicing when he died in 1922. Whitney was a sterling example for his sons, the elder of which, J.T. Jr., launched the Little Courant newspaper in February 1919 from his father's law office. At the time, J.T. Jr. was about 15 years old and still in high school. He published the Courant through August 1922, after which he went to Fisk University in Nashville. His equipment was later sold to the Kentucky New Era. J.T. Sr.'s younger son, Francis Eugene Whitney, was born in 1916 in Hopkinsville, and in 1948 he began operating the F.E. Whitney Real Estate Agency in Hopkinsville. He co-organized and served as Secretary-Treasurer of the Durrett Avenue Realty Company, Inc., which developed the city's first African-American subdivision, the Gladys Gale Village. Whitney was appointed to the interim council of the city of Hopkinsville by Governor Weatherby in 1953, where he served for 21 years. In 1972, Mr. Whitney became mayor of Hopkinsville for 1 week upon the resignation of Mr. Alfred Nath. Beginning in 1977, he served 20 years as a magistrate and later as Deputy Judge Executive on Christian County Fiscal Court. The graduate of Attucks High School, Kentucky State University, and Indiana University, was the first black realtor to be accepted into the Kentucky Association of Realtors and among the first to be accepted in the National Association of Realtors. He was also the first black man to be elected to the Kentucky Association of Realtors Board of Directors and the only black man in the state to be recognized with a Welcome Center, the F.E. Whitney Welcome Center on Interstate 24, named in his honor. F.E. passed away in 2006 at the age of 86. Each of the 3 Whitney men are buried at the Cave Springs Cemetery. Stop number 14 is Dr. James W. Frazier, Sr. and Dr. Patterson Tilford Fraser, with a residence on Hayes Street and a medical office on Clay Street just north of the body shop. General practitioner Dr. James Frazier delivered many children through the 1970s and cared for those of all ages in the community. Before becoming a physician, he served as a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army during World War II, and he is buried in the Green Hill Memorial Gardens Masonic section. Dr. Frazier is not to be confused with other local Frasers, spelled without an I, like P.T. Sr., the noted male and female college professor of P.T.'s nephew, Patterson Tilford Fraser, Jr., another physician who finished medical school in 1913 and ran the natatorium pool for local African Americans in the 1930s. The facility was equipped with bleachers large enough to accommodate 100 people, and the pool measured 1,200 square feet, or 30 by 40. Stop number 15 is the Brooks Pharmacy. After graduating from Attucks High School, Hopkinsville native Garland Brooks and his brother Philip received advanced degrees from Howard University in Washington, D.C. Both returned to Hopkinsville, where Garland went on to own a pharmacy. And memories of the pharmacy's soda shop abound among community locals. The shop and pharmacy closed with integration, and Brooks is laid to rest at the Cave Springs Cemetery. Stop number 16 references the Chitlin Circuit, and the term Chitlin Circuit describes the many small north and south rural towns, including big cities, in which black musicians performed one-night stands due to the strict enforcement of Jim Crow laws. Now, Hopkinsville was a popular stop, geographically located on U.S. Highway 41, demographically offering one of the largest African-American audiences in Kentucky, and the county was wet. Many well-known musicians traveling from Chicago, Indianapolis, or Dayton performed in Hopkinsville on their way to Nashville and Atlanta. Their stops often coincided with the first of the month after people had been paid. As owner and operator of the Chesterfield Lounge, Sam Adams Jr., affectionately known as Papa Smurf, located such acts as Ray Charles, Count Basie, B.B. King, Bobby Blue Bland, Hank Crawford, and many others. The music ranged from jazz, blues, rhythm and blues, and soul. Acts were known to stay at places like Ms. Britt's Boarding House at the corner of 4th and Liberty Streets. Now, depending upon the performer, a ticket ranged from 50 cents to 75 cents per performance. Food and drinks were extra. A nationally known performer such as Count Basie might cost $1.25 per ticket, and many early Chitlin Circuit locations lacked indoor bathrooms or toilets, or running water, and air conditioning was a luxury. Most gigs would play for 2.5 hours and break, and then play for another 1.5 hours and for a 4-hour total. Most contracts stipulated that performers were paid the first money in the door up to a set amount, and good bands played for a guarantee of $300 to $500 per night. The local promoter earned the privilege over a set amount, say $500, and both parties split 50-50 anything over another amount, say $800, but as one seasoned performer stated, the circuit was never about making big money, it was about making constant money. Stop number 17 is the Moore Clinic. Born in 1888 in North Christian County, Dr. Banky Oliver Moore operated the Moore Clinic, the first of its kind run by an African American, from 1931 until 1953, after doing observations at the Mayo Clinic and other national medical centers. It was located in Grace Episcopal Church's rectory, built in the 1870s at the corner of 5th and Liberty Streets, and the red brick structure still stands today as the oldest Episcopal structure in town. Before Dr. Moore had the clinic, he visited his patients door to door beginning in 1914. He and his wife, Mamie Pearl Buckner, had no children. The public housing complex, known as Moore's Court off of 1st Street, are named in his honor. Well respected among a significant African American medical community of physicians, dentists, pharmacists, and surgeons, Dr. Moore's funeral included 9 honorary pallbearers, all of whom were medical professionals and members of the Pennyroyal Medical, Dental, and Pharmaceutical Society. He is laid to rest at Cave Spring Cemetery. Stop number 18 is the Pennyroyal Area Museum. This is the final stop on the tour. Come inside to enjoy exhibits highlighting other local difference makers. The museum originally was a U.S. post office.